Not working, huh? Record you could?
No, it's good.
Oh, good. Tell me when to begin.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning. I was going to give a whole class on the difference between technology and human beings, but we'll do that another time. So a few people asked me here in the Koil, outside of the Koil as well, to explain or review at least a big topic that many of you are probably familiar with. I could say it's one of the chidushim of the Rebbe in Chassidus, in Teres Chassidus. And to make it a provocative title, you can call it, Can God Create a Rock That He Can't Pick Up? So the Rebbe actually addressed this topic, not in that lashon, not in that language, but in a different context. And being B'Hashgacha Pratis, I was involved in the process a bit of how this evolved. It's quite fascinating to discuss. But Bekitz, in the words of the Rebbe, just to sum it up, and then I'll explain the whole Ishtalshlus. The question is, we know that in Shai Yichud V'Amun it says, the Alter Rebbe's whole Shai Yichud V'Amun is based on Teres Abal Shem Tov Elam Hashem Dvorcha Nitzu B'Shamayim HaMachadish B'Tuvi B'Chol Yem Tomid Ma'aseh Bereishis, and B'Chol Yem, Chassidus says, doesn't mean B'Chol Yem Dafke, it means B'Chol Rega. That means the world, because it has no existence of its own, it's Yesh Ma'ayin, as opposed to Yesh Miyesh. So when you take a piece of, let's say, clay, and you make a pot from it, it's Yesh Miyesh. It doesn't have to have a Savas B'Chol Rega from the Yetzer, from the craftsman. But since Yesh Ma'ayin, so B'Chol Rega, the Eibishter has to renew, and if he doesn't renew it, the whole world is Ayin Ve'efes Mamish, Kamoy Kedem Sheishis Yimei Bereishis Mamish. And with all the explanations involved. There's the concept in Chassidus about Tzimtzum, that in order to create existence, the Eibishter employed the Tzimtzum, as that Arizal says in Eitz Chaim, to conceal the Eir Ein Sof, because there was no Sinis Mokim Le'elam as Klal. So these are doctrines that are embedded deeply in Kabbalah and Chassidus that have been accepted and understood from the beginning when we first learned these things. But then, the Rebbe introduced the question, and more importantly, is it mukhrich to be that way? Could the Eibishter have created the world in a way that's not Isavas B'Chol Rega? In the words of the Rebbe, Parsha Matis Maseh Tovshin Mem, that he could have put a koyach adir, a powerful force, into existence that would last for shit al fishnin. Like they think throwing a stone with so much power that it would just continue to exist without constantly needing to renew it. Which of course is not what it says in Shai Yichud V'Amun. Could the Eibishter create the world without a tzimtzum? Kol Yachol, the Eibishter could do anything he wants. So before the Rebbe brought up this topic, the way Chassidim addressed it, and I'll explain it more in detail, was that Kol Yachol does not mean Mishugas. Not the Eibishter pick up a stone that he can't create, that can he create a stone he can't pick up, is a stir minei base. Not because the Eibishter can't do it, it's not Mitzad the Chesed, it's Mitzad the Maila. Because there's one Eibishter, it's like saying, that can the Eibishter destroy himself? And there should be no Eibishter. It doesn't make any sense. The Eibishter is emes mitzad because he's emes. Amitis himotzei, b'loshen Rambam, mechuyev hamitziyas, mitzusim atzmusei. All the language. That's not something that is up for discussion. It's not mitzad haseichel, mitzad hachechrech. Mitzad. That's what the Eibishter is. He's a zebayre. So the same thing was applied to all these sugyas. That this is the way the Eibishter made it, and there is no other way. But the Rebbe insisted that that's not necessarily the case. So that's the so-called summary. So I want to go over the whole ishtalshlus of this because it's a topic I'm sure you've heard about, and it's shrouded with a lot of questions. What exactly the Rebbe did say, he didn't say, and how the Chassidim understand it before, and how we're supposed to understand it today. So let's look a little the ishtalshus of it, and then some of the explanations. But it's critical to understand the history. So I did a lot of research on this topic because when I started writing Hanochas, it was in Tov Shin Mem. I was already working in Tov Shin Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches, and Chazara and Hanochas, but formal official writing I became the official writer of Shabbos Chanukah Miketz Tov Shin Mem. That year, that summer, Shabbos Matas Masay I mentioned, and Dvorim. Then again, Re'ei Tov Shin Mem, the Rebbe spoke about this Barichas. So I was like right in the thick of things. I worked also, of course, with Rabbi Yael, Olav Shalom, and this was a topic that he struggled with, and at that time wrote many questions to the Rebbe about it, and then the Rebbe responded. So I'll give it up, but I'll go. So then at the time I went back and decided to go through a whole research of when the Rebbe first discussed this issue. Because usually the topics the Rebbe spoke about you could find in earlier years, either in Rishimis, or in Siches, or in a letter. And I found that in Tov Shin Chav Dalet already, in English Kaddish you can find it. It's a short letter. I don't remember the date right now. But the Rebbe writes about the Tzimtzum, I believe, that it's not mukhrich that the Tzimtzum had to be a Tzimtzum. It could be Tzimtzum Kipshute also. Because in Tzimtzum itself, I gave shiurim about this earlier, last year I think, that you know that in Tzimtzum itself there's two opinions, and by the Talmid Arizal, there's the opinion of the Yeshua Levov, which is the Mishnah Chassidim, Amnual Chai Reiki, that Tzimtzum is Kipshute. And then of course there's the data that's not Kipshute. The Alter Rebbe in Perek Zayin Shaykh V'Amunah is shadel the shita of Tzimtzum Kipshute. Kipshute means the Eibishter actually literally silik atzmei, removed himself. The Alter Rebbe shadel both Mitzad HaSeichel and Mitzad Rayas, that les asar poniminei, and the Eibishter is not a gashmi, that you could just remove himself. It's only a helam. So it's not Kipshute, which itself needs explanation. The Mishnah Chassidim was not a small person, he was a Gadol B'Yisrael. So what did he think, that the Eibishter could physically remove himself? He didn't understand that it's an inyan of helam. But the Rebbe says in the letter there that's the way the Alter Rebbe explains it. But it's lav dafka that's the only way to understand it. That was, I think, the first time that the Rebbe referred to that there's another way of looking at it, even after so-called, no, even when we look at it today, there's a svara tzimtzum kipshut. The next time that I found, at least, is in Tov Shin Lamed Aleph, by a Suda. Suda was Shmini Atzeres. So in those years, until the Rebbe and the Chomadina passed away, Yisrael B'Tevis, Tov Shin Lamed Aleph, so we know the Rebbe would eat the meals upstairs on the second floor, have the Seder, but also Yom Tov meals. Shoshana, Sukkos, Yom Kippur, Sukkos, Pesach, and Shavuos. So by the meal, the Rebbe would often speak, and they would ask the Rebbe questions. The Rashag was often the one that asked. I'm sure you were there. You've seen quite a few of these meals. And there's a shemus of what the Rebbe said. So Shmini Atzeres Tov Shin Lamed Aleph, the Rashag used to be fed. I remember I heard by Melech Tzvibel and by other maskilim, he used to feed the Rashag questions that he should ask the Rebbe, because it was an opportunity. You can't always have...
Sometimes he said it, in from the Bochum.
Yeah, in from the Bochum would gefrekt. So the Rashag got into this topic and was mevatel, divas halten tzimtzum kipshute, like the Alter Rebbe in Perek Zayin. He's mevatel, he says, lo yike, it was the Lashon there, the Lashon, lo yike elo ha-chachom heima beinehem, that say such a thing. You know, it was the Alter Rebbe sheil, so someone said it by the table. And the Rebbe reacted in a very strong way. He says, "What's b'stajei sheil? Why you sheil it?" There's actually a svara to say that tzimtzum dafka kipshutei. So gadlus habeira, the Eibishter could do as he sees fit. And who says he's mugbal to dafka tzimtzum shalei kipshutei? And adrabah, the Rebbe says, this is according to the Shema as it was written down by those that were there at the table, by the Suda. Adrabah. Before Seichel was established, that it should be that Tzimtzum is Kipshute. Now, but then, because the Alter Rebbe was mekabel from his teachers, that it's not that way, so that's why he explains it that way. But just to be Mishael completely, that it's like, it's mufrach, Gdel Yisrael said it, as I mentioned, Mishnah Chassidim, there are others as well. The Rebbe actually in his Ha'aris, Hashimas Antanya, brings all the Marmikemis of all those that hold Simcha K'Pshutei. You see, they're all Gdel Yisrael. And the Rebbe has a letter as well, Tafrei Sadik Tes, about it. Okay, when they were chazering what the Rebbe said at the meal, Rabbi El was not at the meal. So I heard from people who were there that when Rabbi El heard the chazar, he said, it's impossible the Rebbe said that. It's impossible. Simcha is not K'Pshutei. And that's it. That's how we know it. And it's al pi seichel. Doesn't make sense. The Alter Rebbe explains. The Alter doesn't just say Gzeres Kosher. And he was not mekabel it. He said they didn't understand what the Rebbe meant. But bottom line, he wasn't there. So we don't. So that was. It was. Rabbi El was considered the master. So if he's not mekabel it, that's it. It was like they didn't hear it right. But then this was Lamed Aleph. Then as the years rolled on, I think Lamed Vov, the next time the Rebbe mentions it again, Nefabrengen this time. Nefabrengen, you can't deny it. But it was always remained like the Rebbe is saying it, but we don't really understand what he means. In Tov Shin Mem, I remember this, this I can now speak, not just what I read, this is what I heard, and I was involved. So the Rebbe says in Tov Shin Mem, Matis Maseh, these are the Rebbe's words, like I mentioned before. It's right in the first Sikha. Like a Maimon HaMuzga, the Rebbe says, Be'etzem, the Eibishter could have created the world, these are the words, like Koyach Adir. He invested a Koyach Adir. The Rebbe even used the Lashon from next week's Parsha, Ba'aleisches and Shalheves Elam Elah. He made the Shalheves so powerful that from now on it can go on its own. Not Chaz v'Shalom, the Eibish doesn't exist. But he doesn't need to be Mahava every second. He doesn't have to say again, Bereishis Bor Elokim, or Vayihi Oyer, or Le'elam Hashem Dvorcha Nitzu V'Shamayim.
How did he explain the Dvorcha? He
didn't explain, he just said.
Yeah, but I'm asking you, how did
I know, you could teach nicht with the Baal Shem Tov, that one Dover is always there and stays forever.
Dibur, muss sein dort die ganze Zeit.
Das sagt der Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe said this lav dafke.
Yeah.
It could be once he spoke, and that's it.
I don't understand what I said, but das ist gegen das Media.
I'm middle of, I'm gonna discuss this.
Okay.
That's what the Rebbe said, Befedish, and okay. And the Rebbe said, and that what it says in Shai Yechad V'Amunah, the Rebbe continued, is the Shai Yechad V'Amunah, is the Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe is not Sheilit Be'etzem, because he calls it, he says, it's like a Das Elu, whatever, that Chacham Be'eneim. He doesn't call them, like the Rebbe says in Perek Beis Shai Yechad V'Amunah, he calls them Minim V'Apekursim, that say Yesh Me'esh, and they Yesh Me'esh, and they compare the Eibush to Yesh Ma'in to Yesh Me'esh. In other words, Sad Gadlus HaBeira, the Eibishter could have done this. That's what the Rebbe said in Matis Maseh. So then, right after Shabbos, on Sunday, Monday, so we wrote in a whole bunch of questions to the Rebbe to come to understand this, what this means. The L'cheire Le'elam B'Hashem Dvarchem Nitzu B'Shamayim, like you're saying, means Be'ifan Tmidi. The Alter Rebbe explains it. But the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Zayin about Simcha K'Pshutei, not about Isavas B'chol Rega. And the Rebbe Kilu was speaking that the Kilu Alter Rebbe saying it about Isavas B'chol Rega. There was a whole bunch of pages we wrote into the Rebbe. Shabbos, next Shabbos was Shabbos Pasha Dvarim, Chazain, Tov Shemem. It was a Fabrengen that went till 8:05, the longest Fabrengens, till late into the night, almost till Shabbos ended. Remember, this is the summer months, so it was 8:05, I remember the Fabrengen ended. The last hour of the Fabrengen, the Rebbe addressed this. He said, Gefrekt Shailas, it's a whole arichas. I'm not going to go through the whole sikha because it's really quite complex. But the Rebbe addressed it in a very powerful way. And he said the following. There are two ways you could say that the Eibishter does not create the world every second. One is the kofrim, Ozav Hashem Ha'aretz, and the B'Shamayim, and the Eibishter is like removed himself, Chaz v'Shalom. That's mitzad achsor. That means the Eibishter is so high, Romar Kol Goyim Hashem, that the Eibishter has not involved himself with the world. That is kfirah. But there could be a different reason. Mitzad Gadlus HaBeira. Mitzad Gadlus HaBeira, the Eibishter is higher than existence, so he doesn't invest himself bepratis, beprimius in every detail. And like he gave the example there from the Yeshel Levov, with the Tzimtzum Kipshute, it's like a melech that looks through the window in a Beis in a Beit Shemush, in Ashba. He's not involved, he's not immersed in it. He looks at it so-called, in Lashon of Chassidus, made from Makif, Yedua, not Yedeya. And that's Misad. I just gave you the Maramokim. Look it up, Dvarim Tovshin Mem.
I'm saying, how do you explain Hashgacha Pratis?
Hashgacha Pratis is not Hisavos. That's just Hashgacha. It's not Hisavos. Hashgacha means... Anyway, cooking the Sikha, the Rebbe read Barichas wegen them. And he says clearly that it's not Hisavos b'chol rega, and Hashgacha is not Hisavos. You could be a mashgiach in a restaurant, and you're not creating the restaurant every second.
By people.
No, the Eibishter said by the Eibishter, kann ich sein das. Look, you don't have to accept it, but it's the Rebbe gesagt. Okay, so that's what we're discussing now. You see, that's what disturbed everybody. But the Rebbe said it, and he said it again and again and again to the point you could not deny it. After that, Farbrengen, I remember Rabbi El told me that. He said in Tov Shalom at Aleph, he thought that it was misunderstood. He says clearly the Rebbe is saying this, and that's that. He still didn't understand it. And so bottom line is, the Rebbe spoke Barichas about it, and he said that you could say the Hashgacha is there, but not the Isavus is there. He explained Barichas this. He says the Alter Rebbe, however, since he was makabel from his teachers, otherwise, that's why he explained it. But it could have been the other way around. And he explained whether Tzimtzum Kipshute is connected to Isavus b'chol rega. The Rebbe said yes. There's some places the Rebbe says otherwise. But bottom line is, the Rebbe explained it at length, Mitzad Gadlus Habeira. Now, I remember after the Farbrengen, as I said, Abiel told me he still doesn't understand it. So he wrote a bunch of other questions. I didn't tell him what to do, but I said to him, I don't know if you write more questions, you're like basically, it's like you're not trying to understand the Rebbe, you're trying to disagree with the Rebbe, and you have to be careful. So the next Farbrengen was Pasha A, and the Rebbe, and let me just say this, in Shabbos Chazain, the Rebbe said that Halavayim is also kochen in these sugyas, in these deep sugyas, instead of kochen zich nehere tichle tisabloye lichtele, or nehere chivre, nehere uchme, avaisa lichtele, so also kochen in these you say this, simtsum, isavus, and so on. That's what the Rebbe said in the Dvarim. The A, a few weeks later, the Rebbe said he got more questions, and the Rebbe then was completely mevatel. He said, Weisteis mekleipst nicht voneinander, me versteht nicht was meret. So the Rebbe says, so better go back to the Inyanim and Sugis that you're familiar with, and don't kriech in these new things. The Rebbe was basically saying that I'm trying to introduce a deeper understanding of Chassidus, and since you're not getting it, so go back to that's when the Rebbe said, with the Rambam, which brings another example. The Rambam, of course, is Shelel, those that say that the Eibush has a goof, right? The Rambam in Hilchos say that, and the Ravid says, Gedelim v'tevim imenu, that held that way. Now we know, we don't hold Eibush as a goof Gashmi, and the Rambam mishailed it completely. And the Ravid says, no, Gedelim v'tevim imenu held that way. So the Rebbe in Tov Shem Gimel speaks about it as well, that the Rambam is speaking like Alpi the Seichel that he understands. But Be'etzim, the Eibishter could have Kol Yachal, and he could also mislabish himself in the form of a goof, whether you understand it or not. And the Rebbe brought that then as well, and he said, and he wants someone to explain to him what's the difference between Gvul and Koyach HaGvul. Chassidus says there's the Koyach HaGvul in Ein Sof, we don't have an issue with that. But Gvul seems to be there's an issue. What's the difference? That's what the Rebbe said. Anyway, after that Farbrengen, should have a lichtike Gan Eden. Abiel loved him and credited him and Koras Hatev, but he went into a deep, I don't call it depression, but he definitely had didn't show up so quickly. He was very disturbed by what the Rebbe said, because the Rebbe was basically mevatel all his questions. But I remember I was close with him, so I said to him, what is really bothering you? Well, the Rebbe is saying, Milsa B'Taima, the Eibush is not mugbal in the laws of Seichel that we have. Once there's Seichel and once the Alter Rebbe was Makabel, then we understand it. But the Eibush could have created Seichel different. Who says 2 + 2 = 4? Could be 2 plus 2 equals 5. Who says day and night are different? These are all Gedorim the Eibishter created. That was my, Tmimus dik shaila to him. So this is what he explained to me, what's bothering him. He said, why do you think Chassidim always said, Kol Yochel is not Vild or Meshuggah? Well, of course the Eibishter could do whatever he likes. Yeah, the Eibishter could create a situation where there's no Eibishter in Inyan, whatever that means. But it's crazy, it doesn't make any sense. So you're saying that because logic doesn't matter, we don't care. But the Eibishter did create logic. And his main point that he wanted to say, and this is what he wrote to the Rebbe was not Makabel at all, was that the Chabad, Chassidus Chabad, is a Lakus Ongeton and Seichel. If you're going to say that Seichel cannot connect to levels in Atzmus, because Atzmus is not bound by the laws of logic, then basically we never have Achdus with a Chelik and a Lakus. So this concept that there could be Tzimtzum Kipshute, or Isavis B'choreg, or Isavis not B'choreg, or that the Eibishter can be Guf, Gashmi, but Ram Mishael. If you say that there is such a darga where that's possible, that means that the Nivroim, in our Gedorim, in our Seichel, can never connect to that, because that's beyond us. So it's not a question whether of course the Eibishter can do whatever he wants. But then the world that he created will never connect with that part of the Eibishter.
Why not? Through mitzvahs. Mitzvahs you produce the Lima.
Well, no, because also our Seichel has to connect to the Eibishter. The Seichel is also v'yadaita hayim v'shavesa levavecha. We're not talking about le machshavesa seichem, we understand. But even that doesn't come and say that it defies logic. In other words, the idea that, let's say, the Alter Rebbe explains that the Eibishter created existence and b'chol rega is mischadish, b'chol rega mechodosh. So now our Seichel understands, Kimuvin, at the end of the day, the Alter Rebbe himself says that later when he talks about hu v'midesa v'echad, hu v'chachmas echad, that ein, what's the Lashon? Ein Seichel odem yochel lahasig zebe b'amitose. Or the Rambam even says, by hu amada v'hu yedei hu yidua, that we don't understand, that we all understand that there's something, but it's still in the gather of that gufa to say, for example, you know your teacher is greater than you are. You don't understand what he's saying. But he's not saying something that's completely hepech. It's just that's beyond you. That was the logic. So I said to him, maybe the Eibishter is telling us that sometimes you connect, like you just said. I didn't say through mitzvah, but maybe sometimes the way we connect to the Eibishter is not through Seichel, it's through Kabbalah Seichel. Maybe this is the true Kabbalah Seichel. They beferish not, that there is an element in Elikus or an Atzmus that is beyond these rational laws. Anyway, the point being, let me continue with the history, and then I'll go a little more into the explanation. So the Rebbe, that's what happened to Shemem, and it was very clear that the Rebbe said it. There was no more that he said it by Asuda and maybe misunderstood. It was very clear what the Rebbe said. But I know clearly Rabbi Yael was not able to really explain it. Even by him it was, again, called Kabbalah in the Kabbalah. The Rebbe says it, so he accepts it. Okay. Tavshim Mem Gimel I mentioned, Shabbos Mem Gimel and Nosei, the Shabbos after Shavuos. The Rebbe speaks about it again by Riches, the same Teichen. A little more different Asius, but the same idea. And there the Rebbe brings a Rambam with Guf Vigvia, with the Eibishter's, can we say, like the Ravid says, G'delim Tevim Mimenu, said that the Eibishter does have a Guf. And the Rebbe said the same idea, and he brought Simsa Kipshute. I think he also brought, and then I found in Chassidus that there's Maimorim Vehechrim, and a few other Maimorim from the Rebbe Marash, from the Rebbe Rashab. I think in Tofresh Lunches there's a Maimer that the Rebbe Rabbeim bring, that the Eibishter Be'etzem did not have to create Esses Sfiris. He chose to create Esses Sfiris. Same idea, not mamish the same Asius, but bottom line is that everything we talk about is after the Eibishter chose to create a Seder Shtalshlus. Al Pi Seichel, then that's what we have now. So obviously it's Eser V'lei Teisha, Eser V'lei Achad Aser. But it could have been otherwise. And since it could have been otherwise, we know in Yechelis means in Inyan, there is a darga where it is otherwise. Or at least potentially otherwise. Mem Gimel. Then the Rebbe spoke about it again, I think in Mem Daled once. Then Mem Vov was the Hadran by Yakel and the Rambam. And then the Rebbe said it again with the whole Trask. And this time Rabbi Yael prepared the Sikh himself. And he again decided to revisit it. he decided, one last stand. He's going to challenge Kavyachal. He's going to ask questions, and he asked the same questions again. And this time the Rebbe was completely mevatel any of his havaminas. Basically everything he wrote clearly to the Rebbe, l'cheira, that means that our seichel can never be nisachid with elikus. We have to be mevatel our seichel. So the whole idea that Chabad, the Alter Rebbe was explaining it up his seichel, is only in the world of seichel. But l'mayla mizeh, we can't be nisachid with elikus. We have to be nisbatel to elikus, basically. And the Rebbe said, yes, absolutely, that's correct. So, of course, now it was clear that Rebbe did it in writing, the Sichas Muge. You can look it up, it's the Hadron of the Rambam Memvov. And that became like the final say, that was that. And the Rebbe probably said it a few times more. In Tafshin Nun, actually, interestingly, in Nun and Aleph, then it became almost like a Dovid Rogil. And not every day, but the Rebbe said a number of times, I think Rosh Hashanah Tafshin Nun, and then maybe Nun Aleph again. The Rebbe basically says, Yedua, as the Eibishter Nish Mugbal, he's not limited to all these things. It's only after he chose it that way. And there's a darga where all this did not have to be this way. Very clear that the Rebbe made this now became like a Dovid Pasha. So that which began in Chav Daled and then Lamed Aleph, sporadically, avart here and avart there, became basically an approach. And if you look in Chassidus, like I said, besides, and it's taken the Maimonim from the Rebbe Rashav, Rebbe Marash, I think the Hechrim and the Maimonim from the Rebbe Rashav are taken in the Hadron Memvov. I think also Derech Hamuna, the Sicha and Derech Hamuna, what year was that? Mem Zayin? Yeah, the Sforim came back. Mem Ches, Vayetze. So the Rebbe gave a beer on the Sefer Derech Hamuna that was returned. So there too he brings this sugya. And there, they take these things. So the only place in Chassidus you find is where it says by the Rabbeim that the Eibishter could have done it differently, but he chose to do it this way. I found later from the Tzemach Tzedek, in the name of the Alter Rebbe, in Ira Teira in Yonim, he writes this lashon, or Kamad this lashon, that the Alter Rebbe, but Mamash, he writes in Biksav, that the Alter Rebbe said that the world, as we know it, is the way the Eibishter wanted al pi the seichel that he created that the world should follow. In other words, basically everything we know is the way the Eibishter created it that way. It's essentially hinting that the Eibishter did not have to do it that way. So, but nevertheless, why do we always attempt? Someone once asked the Rebbe, if that's the case, then the Eibishter can do anything. So, Mokamon Neina Min Amida, it's Taka Chiddush, but you could say it everywhere. Every question you could ask, you say, Kol Yachal, the Eibishter just did it. And the Rebbe answered, no. Because the Eibishter wants befeiros that we should make an attempt, wherever possible, to understand something. So even though Koyach HaMafil Lasis, for example, brings together Neshama and Guf, we still have a whole Ishtalshlus, how Neshama is mislabish in a Guf. And there's a Yerida, and a Tzimtzum. From Atzilus to Bria, you can take away Mavat, the whole Seder Ishtalshlus. What does the Eibishter need Ishtalshlus for? He couldn't create this world without Atzilus, without Bria, without Ak, without all the levels, without the Kav, without the Tzimtzum. Of course he could. So that's not, the Rebbe is coming to say that because the Eibishter could, but he wanted that it should be, as much as possible, we should try to understand it. Then the things we can't understand. So when it says, it's dafka because it says once. You can't just apply that and say every situation, all the questions Chassidus asks. How do you metavach, for example, Agdus Hashem with Riboy HaNevraim? The Eibishter is one, and we see there's so many details in existence. And Alpitera there are details. It's not an illusion. So why don't you just answer, Kol Yachol, there can be a paradox. That's not the case. You have to, wherever possible, try to understand it with seichel. Then there are areas that remain beyond. So here's how I would explain this whole, first of all, besides the fact that the Rebbe is saying it's obviously this is Emes Lamite, but why was the Rebbe so insistent? And why did the Rabbeim not focus on this? You don't find this in Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe doesn't hint anywhere in Shayach V'Amunah that it could have been a different way, and he was makabel from his teachers. The Rebbe says that. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that. He could have said that there could have been a different way, and the Eibishter made it this way. So this is Yesh Leima B'derech Hech, my own understanding of it. And others have different explanations, But here's how I would explain what's really the depth of it and why the Rebbe is emphasizing it and why is it negayah to Deir HaShvi for us to know this. So let's go back to the beginning of Gilui Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov. What was the main chiddush, one of the main chiddushim of the Baal Shem Tov? There was Torah, there was Aveda, there were Talmidei Chachamim, there was tremendous amount of Torah and Yira by Eden before the Baal Shem Tov. So what did the Baal Shem Tov come to Mechadish exactly? He wasn't Mechadish a new chiddush in Nigla, or a new halacha, a new explanation of halacha. He came to Megala, what we call the Etzem, right? The Etzem in Torah, and the Etzem in the Neshama. Being that the world, and Eden especially, were in a state of Isalfus, to the language from Chassidus, were like Beruchnius, either due to the Shibud Golius, the difficult oppressions and afflictions in Golos. So the Ruach of Eden was very down. In addition, it was creating splits, like we know the split between Talmidei Chachamim and Oshim Pshutim, scholars, simple people. When the Baal Shem Tov came, that's why he was called Yisrael. Chassidus explains in different sikhs and so on, that when someone is bisalfus, someone is like in a faint state, in a coma, you call them by their name. The name touches the etzem and it awakens them. And therefore, the Baal Shem Tov came to touch etzem and neshama. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov was involved, especially in his early years, anoshim pshutim, with children. He was a bagleiter, like an equivalent of a bus driver today. He didn't even teach children. He walked them to school, to walk them to learn. And would say that, ask them how they are, Baruch Hashem, make brachas for them. Simple things to be megala, the etzem and neshama, and show that every id, even an ish poshet, is connected to Eibishter, not just a Talmid Chacham, not just someone who's on a Baal Madrega. So we talk about the Gilui HaEtzem. Gilui HaEtzem we know is higher than Giluyim. Giluyim is based on a person's level of like the difference between Simchas Torah and the rest of the year. Simchas Torah we all dance equally with a favikulta, a wrapped up Sefer Torah. Why? Because it's not about learning. If you're talking about a regular day in the year, of course a Talmid Chacham is on a higher level than a person who doesn't know how to learn, or Lo Yada Maika Amar, or people on lower levels. There's chilukim, and that's part of Torah too. There should be chilukim. There are teachers, there are students. There's a Moshe Rabbeinu, not like Kairach said, Kol Eidik Deishim. It's true, Kol Eidik Deishim, but there's also a hierarchy. But Simchas Torah is Gilui Etzem. And Gilui Etzem, everybody dances because the Sefer Torah, we're talking now, not the Seichel of Torah, the Etzem of Torah. So the Baal Shem Tov was Megala that Etzem. Now, if it stopped right there, with the Baal Shem Tov and then the Magid, you could say, okay, and as actually the critics, the Misnagdim, that's what they criticized of Chassidus. They were saying Chassidus is focusing on Chitzenius. What they called Etzem is Chitzenius, meaning not about learning Torah, not about Ava V'yira. They criticize Chassidus, dancing, behaving in wild ways. Comes the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe, Chassidus Chabad, is malbish this whole Etzem of the Baal Shem Tov into Chabad, into Seichel, which was actually some of the Talmidei HaMagid criticized the Alter Rebbe for that. They said it's not the Derech HaBaal Shem Tov. That's when we say he Teres HaBaal Shem Tov, or Ata Yismach Yisrael in the Akdamah Tanya. Why? Because it was time to emphasize that this is Dafka Teres HaBaal Shem Tov. But Bechitzenius, you could argue, the Baal Shem Tov was teaching much more Hislavus, Hispilus, Etzem, Pshittus. And here the Alter Rebbe is turning it into a whole doctrine called Chassidus Chabad. A whole doctrine with Api Seichel, and I say, there's Talshus. I mean, you start learning Tanya, and then you learn Teira, Likut Teira. So some felt, actually the Kalisker said, that it's like, or maybe the Baruch Mezhebush, I mean, the few that were menaged to it, he said that the Alter Rebbe is giving people the gun with all the ammunition and the powder. This is brought in Beis Rebbe, but it's missing the spark. So imagine having the whole, all the ingredients, but you don't have the cake. He was saying the Baal Shem Tov was teaching the spark, the nitzutz, the slavos, the chayas, the simcha. And the Alter Rebbe is being malbish all in the seichel, so it's taking away from that spark. Obviously they were wrong, and that's what Levi Yitzchak Braditchever and the Alter Rebbe finally wrote back to Avram Kalisker, and he wrote to him that that this is beferish they were makabel from the Magid, wasn't a chidush. What was the Alter Rebbe doing? The Alter Rebbe wasn't chaz v'sholem going away from the etzem of the Baal Shem Tov. He was taking the etzem and revealing it b'his galus in Chabad and in Midas. That a person has to, because the Baal Shem Tov wasn't coming to say that no, let's stop learning chaz v'sholem, let's stop davening, and let's stop having ava v'yira. He was saying, let's remember, it all has to be driven by the etzem, and the etzem has to come into the keiches hanefesh. And that's what the Alter Rebbe did. And the generations of afterwards continued doing that. So it was a combination of etzem and giluyim. Comes the Rebbe, and one of the chidushim of the Rebbe in Vayigash, Chelik Hei, Kutei Sichos, where the Rebbe says about Yofer Sha'achas B'tshuva Ma'asim Tevim Be'elam Hazim Mikol Chai Elam Haba. And then it says Yofer Sha'achas Shel Kedas Ruach Be'elam Haba Mikol Chai Elam Haza. So the Rebbe Marash explains how do you reconcile that? Nachas Ruach Be'er Nachas Ruach Nivra. If you're talking about the Nachas Ruach of the Be'er, it's Be'elam Haza, Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim in this world. Nachas Ruach of the Nivra is much more pleasure in Elam Haba. So the Rebbe asks a very difficult question. If that's the case, Mashiach and Geula is simply a tzukike. It's like throwing us a candy. Nachas Ruach Be'er is much more in Golas, much more in the Hell and Behester when we have Mesidus Nefesh. Mashiach is for us good, because that's when it'll be Begili. The Rebbe's answer, which is also an unbelievable chiddush, is that no, the etzem has to be Begili. And the etzem is not Begili, so-called the etzem is not, Shleimus etzem is atzmus, is to also be Begili. So also for the Eibush is Negeya Geula Mitis Vashlema. Okay. So now comes, and this is the chiddush here, the Derech Efshar at least. So the Rebbe is coming, especially later in the Nesiyas. It's in the early Lameds already, but especially in the Mems, and going all the way to the beginning of the Nuns. And the Rebbe is saying like this, that after all the Giluyim and after all the Keiches Pnimim, the Chassidus teaches us to bring the Etzem into the Keiches Pnimim. Let's not forget there's an Etzem. And the Etzem is L'mayla Meseichel. So as much as we understand Esav's B'chorega and Simsim is Dafke Nishke Pshutei and the Gebrish is not a goof, keep in mind that the Etzem is always higher than who we are. In other words, the ultimate goal is connecting to the Etzem. When it says, for example, that Lo Yireni Odom V'chai, a person can't see me and live. Why? Because at the end of the day, to be experienced the Eibishter, you have to be the Eibishter. And we're capable of reaching there, but we have to go to a place that's beyond Seichel. So the Rebbe wasn't just coming and saying a nice Inyan that the Eibishter's Kol Yachli can do whatever he wants. He was saying, no, there's a high, that, especially as we come before the Geula and Deir HaShvi, there's a higher level to reach, to understand that all the Asbedim and Biurim Chassidus is to a certain level. That leads us to another place like Tachlis HaYediyah Shalei Neda, that we can become Nesachid with Elikuz that's even higher than the Gedorim that explain Esavos B'chol Rega and Simsuk Pshutei and so on. So Chabad Chassidus is still Chabad, and it has to all come in Chabad, but Chabad itself compels us to bring us to a place of Etzem that's higher than Chabad. And that's why the Rebbe was so insistent. Because what he was saying was, and that's why I think the Rebbe was like frustrated in a sense, you're not understanding my chiddush here, you don't understand what I'm trying to say, you're trying to bring back everything back to the level that you have to understand it. And I'm trying to teach you that there's a level of etzem that no, that the Eibishter did not have to do it this way. And that gufa we could understand. But you have to mevatel yourself to that. That requires bittul. It's not Hisagdus on your terms, it's Hisagdus on the Eibishter's terms. Purim Tovshem Memches. Shusha, Erev Purim, Tainus Esther, the Rebbe explained, Lo Yireini Odom B'chai, he said, it says, V'lurises Acherai Upone Lo Yiro. The Rebbe asks a bunch of questions what that means. And the Rebbe ultimately answers and says, V'lurises Acherai Uponai. You can see Acherai, and you can see Ponai. But Ponai you have to see by Lo Yiro, by not looking. So Acherai means the way the Eibishter is mislabish, Alakus is mislabish in Seichel and in Midas, and in the Gidrei of Elam Haz, and the Gidorim of Seder Shtalshalus, that's that you can see directly, like Yediyas Achiyuv. But if you want to appreciate Ponai, meaning the Eibishter as he's beyond all these logical Hasbedim, that has to be Lo Yiro, through Bittul, by not looking, meaning not in your terms, but on the Eibishter's terms. And that's what I suggest maybe the ultimate chiddush, what the Rebbe is saying is that when Mashiach comes, we're going to have both elements. You see, the pasuk says, "V'lo yilamdo eid ishas re'eyu, ki kulam yedu eisim limiktanam v'adudelam." So we won't teach, one person will not have to teach another. Ki everyone will know eisi, etzem, atzmus. But then he says, "Miktanam v'adudelam." So the Rab Levik and the Rebbe explains as well, what's Miktan Vagdin? You just said there is no Kotten V'Godel because everyone, so the Rebbe's answer is no, that everyone will be there'll be a Kotten and Godel, there'll be Dargis. But everyone will be able to experience the Etzem. They will not need a teacher to teach the Etzem. Even while in Giluyim there may be difference between Ktan and Vagdela. So ultimately, in preparing for Geula, you really need to have both elements. You need to have Etzem, it's L'mayla M'Seichel, and you need to have the Etzem, is Mislabish and Seichel in Chabad. And that's why the Rebbe was emphasizing so much this level, that so-called L'mayla, M'kol Agdorim, that Simpson could be Pshutei, that Isavas doesn't have to be B'chol Rega, and all the other details that we discussed before. So, Kol HaEsek B'Teres, when we Esek in these things, hopefully this itself can be Mamshech L'Inyanim, that we should take a B'Zeichet to the Geula, the Etzem Begili. Asmos begin in Gilui.